Well, thank you, and good afternoon. If I tell my dad that I'm actually advising young people of what to do in their lives, he will have a fit. Because he's convinced I'm totally chaotic, I'm totally a failure, and everything else. He made me to become a university professor, and I did my revolution. And once I had made my revolution, he accepted I had made my revolution, and I changed again and again and again. I'm going to tell you a bit about that story because it's unusual, it's different, it's not a career, it's chaos. But making structure out of chaos, that's what I like. It's all about that. And anyway, my absolute objective in this time together is to make sure that none of you is going to ask me about an internship in a refugee camp. Please. And please, none of you ask me to help of doing a shipment of useless stuff in a truck to Greece or something like that. We can do that differently. We're in the 21st century, we can do business differently. And there's some brilliant examples out there of how you can change it. The old aid business is dead, and we're going to speak about that. Now about how structure and chaos. So I grew up in this wonderful Berlin, which was still divided in the 70s. And that was the time of squats. That was time of some form of the post-68 revolution against structures. Macht kaputt, was euch kaputt macht. That was Georg von Rauchhaus, Bethanien. That was my world, Iggy Pop and all that in here in town. They were all roaming around and we were trying to roam with them, we the teenies. And we tried to make ourselves as cool as possible. We became all sorts of the hip things of the time. Of course, we were the bourgeois little kids from rich families trying to play revolutionaries. Yeah, but that was the mood of the time. So I said, no, I will not go and study. I will not become a university professor like my dad. And so what do we do? Well, I said, well, let me go to Latin America. I will do something there. I don't know what, but I will go to Latin America. So after my Abitur, the problem was I needed some money, so I got stuck in France on the way to South America. I mean, the usual thing, it was nice, the mountains, very romantic, and me and my friends, 2 German friends, we bought some goats, and we made horrible goat cheese, full of worms, because you need actually to protect the cheese thing against flies, and so they don't come, but it was horrible. So finally, luckily, these poor goats were eaten by wild dogs, and we didn't have to make goat cheese anymore. So I decided, no, I didn't decide. I was offered to become a roofer, but I mean, I don't like heights, but no problem. So we set up actually what I would consider a fantastic social project at the time, which was revitalizing the Pyrenees in France through collective work, working in a collaborative effort as a cooperative in the mountains, providing jobs to ourselves and to other people. So that was my first social experience. And because in the mountains you don't work only, you also enjoy. We said we work only 4 days, everybody the same money, and it was very, very social. And that actually, that very practical working against, again, some resistance, because roofs and height, and I'm one of the last traditional roofers of the Pyrenees, actually. So you do lots of church clock towers and castles and things like that, so it's all very high, horrible. Anyway, so, but for 7 years in those mountains, which has become now one of the most active and lively areas, rural areas, it's one of the perfect examples of revitalization of a rural area, because that is what, in fact, is one of the things missing. And one of my hippie friends is today the mayor of the village. At the time, these guys, they shot at us. They said, we don't want any hippies here. We don't want any wild people from other parts of France or Europe. Now my friend who came on a motorbike, he is the mayor. So that was for me an experience of social change in a very remote and rural area. But it was not good enough. So, as I said, my father had finally accepted that I'm there And he even supported me also financially because you're poor, right? Very poor, at least for some time. He liked it in the end. And then I said, no, I start a new life. So I took my motorbike, which again I bought despite not knowing anything about engines, motorbikes. I'd never ridden a motorbike. So I decided to go through the Sahara, follow the Paris-Dakar, because that was cool. So, and then somewhere there in Mopti, Mali, I met in a bar, and there's one advice in your career planning: socialize in bars. Bars are something very cool. There you meet people, you get a little bit drunk, and then it's easier to speak. So I met in Mopti some young people, a young couple, and I stayed with them 6 months building a school with Adobe. Never had done this before, so I learned it. Very nice thing. I said, yes, this is cool. I'm going to do something like that. And so went back to France, sold my shares in the cooperative, and started applying with NGOs. This is all what I knew, so I went on the list of the NGOs, started applying with the first, starting with A. So I got the job with AICF, Action contre la faim, or contre la femme, I would say, because they were very anti-women. They only hired men at the time. And they sent me to Uganda. Uganda, so I was suddenly given a piece of jungle. Now, my friend, you do a vocational training center. You teach young people in a post-war situation to actually learn real jobs. Okay, so I was given a project document, $400,000, 2 years, and I had to do that school out of this bit of jungle. It was very interesting, but I didn't know how to manage a project. I didn't know, nothing. But I was given the responsibility because I was a white guy, and that's why that was basically my qualification. And I had done something with construction. This is how my NGO at the time hired me. White, can read and write, and did something with construction. Now he's a project manager. The stupid things I did being in charge of this project, you cannot imagine. I'm not daring to speak about what we did. But somehow it became a pilot project because, of course, I could not stick to that project document. I cannot accept a prescribed thing. So instead of doing what they had told on the project document, we put it all down and we did what we thought was right. So we built the school with our trainees. We made it self-sustained because in the same time we planted bananas and pineapples and other things and sold them in the market. Within 2 years, the project was self-sufficient. It had workshops. It had, in a post-war horrible zone, achieved something incredible. I rebelled against my NGO. I was kicked out, survived in Uganda for a little while. And again, in a bar, had met some people from the UN. And I said, we are setting up an airlift to South Sudan. So, okay, I said, we will help you. So I helped them. And then in 1991, started bush running in southern Sudan for the UN, distributing food. That was hardcore. Suddenly in a war. Suddenly it's not fun anymore. Suddenly there is dead people around you. Suddenly there is the stench of rotting bodies, and you're staying in there for a year while basically driving over dead bodies. This is no joke. And also because of personal experiences, I was almost killed in a robbery at home in Kampala. I had no fear anymore. I was doing stupid things, become totally reckless, running around in there, and I was so cool. I was so fantastically cool. So everybody said he is cool because he's not afraid. He's going onto front lines. He's crawling around in the bush alone with rebel forces and so on. And then something happened. With 20,000 Sudanese, we fled into Kenya because we were attacked by the government forces close to the Kenyan border. They became refugees, and I started working with refugees. Seconded to UNHCR, the refugee agency, and since 92, I was basically working for UNHCR. 92 till 2014, a long career. And remind you, I never had any diploma. I had never gone to university. And of course, that violated all the recruitment rules of the United Nations, but somehow it was a good time back in '92 because that is when former Yugoslavia was sort of cooking up when there was problems in the Great Lakes and there were big problems in Kenya. So they were recruiting people in bars, backpackers, again, people who could read and write and who looked somehow Western. That was working very well. So there were entire armies recruited who had no diploma or were just basically there because they were there. Which is, in fact, turns out to be today the elite of the United Nations agencies. These are the best. Those wild backpackers, people who came on sailing boats, on horses, God knows what, they are the best, actually, because they didn't follow the normal career path. They didn't follow the usual beaten tracks of going through different programs which they offered. There were hands-on people who actually still know what it means to do something. So I'm not basically judging in a negative sense all these big bureaucracies. There are very good people in there, but most of them came in through unusual ways in a different form. So what I'm trying to tell you here is it has been my life till this UN and within the UN has been driven by coincidence, has been driven by jumping on opportunities, never say no. That's why I've got 6 kids. I'm sorry, but I mean, it's very sometimes a bit too easy. But anyway, so that's in a way. So I spent 22 years, 2 months, 2 weeks, and 2 days with the United Nations attached to UNHCR. Why do I know it so exactly? Because when I quit, that's how they calculate your entitlements. 22 years, 2 months, 2 weeks, and 2 days. So every day is calculated, and you're getting some money for it when you quit voluntarily. That's what I did. But even within that UN career, I've always challenged the system. There's always a need to be outside of the box. And that maybe came from my revolutionary times here in Berlin. Macht kaputt, was euch kaputt macht. Change the system from within. Der lange Marsch durch die Institutionen. Changing the system from within. That's what I was trying. So I was always pushing against the limits. So I was the most unpleasant, in fact, employee you could find for a supervisor, in a sense, for traditional supervisors, because I was never happy with what they were putting on a piece of paper. I was always challenging it. Because there's a need to look around the corner. You have to be curious. Curiosity is one of the things which is absolutely crucial in all of that. Never be content, which is a tiring thing. It's very tiring never to be happy. Always think you can do it better. And interestingly, a lot of this is confirmed to what the private sector is saying. I remember a conversation with Per Hegenes, who is the head of the IKEA Foundation. He said, look, we did produce the shelf Billy millions of times. Everybody has Billy at home, I guess, or something similar. We are still improving it. It's not perfect. We know it's not perfect. It will never be perfect. And that principle, that I kept in all my operations. It's not perfect. It can't be perfect. So don't be content because there's a handbook which tells you this is how you do refugee camps. Don't follow it exactly because it has to be different. There has to be something better and always tried to look for that better. Process management. It was something else I learned when I was back in 2001 to 2004. I was working on a regional cooperation in the Western Balkans and somehow I got involved in a hospital project. In a hospital, there are specialized companies which look into optimization of the processes, process management, looking into how you get people in. For instance, I mean, with due respect to the organization here, the process management of getting people into this room was not perfect. We agree? Yes, it was not perfect. It was not bad, but it was not perfect. So it can be done better next time. So it's learning about what you're already doing. It's always changing it and always looking for the other things. So in all my operations, I was becoming sort of the nuisance because I was standing there and looking and always trying to see of how you do it differently. That little thing which makes the life of the people working in an operation easier, and of course, being client-oriented. And that doesn't change whether you are a refugee or whether you are a customer in a store or whatever. It's always thinking about how does it feel when somebody is, for instance, throwing food at you? How does it feel if you have to queue up for 2 hours to get something which you don't want? I mean, that's what humanitarian aid is about, by the way. Let me put here a bracket on humanitarian aid because it needs to be said. Humanitarian aid, as it is designed, is dehumanizing. It's a logistic exercise. There is how many people in this room? Say 300. Okay, 300. And as I keep on telling every audience, if I'm an emergency manager, and I was emergency manager, don't believe I will look at your faces 1 minute. And don't do that. I count you. You're becoming faceless, anonymous. You're becoming a number. I divide you by 5, that's the number of tents. I multiply you by 18, that's the number of liters of water. I will, of course, multiply you by 2,100 kilocalories, that's your food. These are the humanitarian standards. I don't look at you as individuals. I look at you as a logistic exercise. I look at you as a challenge from a logistic point of view. And it's very disturbing if that continues at times for 20 years. And just to mention, the first refugee camp which I set up, which is the refugee camp of Kakuma in northwestern Kenya, which happened when we fled together from southern Sudan over to Kenya, it's still there. It's still managed as a refugee camp, as a storage facility for a number of people. It's still not managed as a living space as it should be. So that was actually recognizing and understanding this, and I'm also, as I keep on saying, was getting tired of being above. I'm standing here on a podium. I'm looking at you. Again, that is how it feels when you are the manager of an operation taking care of tens of thousands of people. And actually, it's not on the same level. When I come down, when I sit with you, then it becomes the same level. But I'm not even expected to do that. That's not my job in this. So I got very frustrated, and knowing and learning increasingly that the system I was working in, the United Nations system, and here again, it's important to understand, once you're in, yes, you are a civil servant, it's very comfortable. You may not always work for the same agency. I was working attached to UNHCR, but was jumping to UNDP, I was working with the peacekeeping operations, I was working with the humanitarian coordination, UN OCHA, I was working with political affairs when I was the Deputy Special Envoy of the United Nations to Pakistan, and so on and so forth. But anyway, it's all the same. It's very difficult to actually bring about real change. So I said, after a while, I'm tired of this. And again, remember my dad, he really had accepted that I was finally in UN. When I started talking about the UN, he said, "What is this? I mean, what are you even talking about? You are happy now in your Pyrenees and so on, and now you want to do something like that? Rubbish." Anyway, he got used to the fact that I was earning good money and I was somehow stable without being stable, always in shitholes, in difficult places, dangerous, divorcing, separating, finding new women. I mean, all that was always hated. But the rest, he was very proud of saying, "Well, my son works for the UN and then he's on TV and is this and that." Was very proud. But at the same time, well, still, of course, questioning, what is this all about? And then I told him, "I'm quitting. I will quit." "Are you retiring?" "No, I'm not retiring. Take all my money out, pay all my debts, pay all what I owe to my ex-wives and all and everybody, pay my mortgages off, and so get rid of debts, but I want to be free." He said, "How can you do that with 53 years or 52 years at the time? How can you again change your life? I said, because there's so many things to do in life. You can do so many things. You can change it, and you must change it. There is not such a thing such as one career. I feel of being free, and I feel like challenging the system. I actually feel today like building up a new system. I want to build up the anti-UN, not to destroy the UN, but to build up a system which works. So that's what we're doing currently. So I'm in a way a very poor social entrepreneur with the aim of changing the world. But why not? Look for the different way. Try the other things. So just to say on that note, so what we're trying to do and what is our principle is to say, well, there are enough resources which can change the world. If you stop all research, all development, all innovation, you can draw water out of the air. You can make energy out of everything. You have all the tech. You have zillions of money hanging around and not knowing what to do. Talk to investors. They're bored. They don't know where to invest anymore. I mean, in the capitalist system. They don't know anymore. So it's enough out there. So just time out for innovation, and there's enough to improve everybody's lives. There are 3 billion people out there who don't have enough or don't share the same, or don't have the same access to what the world can do. So our idea is make it accessible. That is real change. What is already invented is no need to reinvent it, so move it and make it as accessible in very fragile, difficult environments. As just said, I just came from northern Iraq. I spent the last week in northern Iraq, Kurdistan. Everybody's obsessed now, getting ready for the reconstruction of Mosul and so on, fine. But I mean, there is enormous capacity, there's enormous knowledge already, but there are enormous opportunities for know-how transfer. So I was with the vice governor of Duhok a couple of days ago. That city has doubled in size because of displacement, refugees and displaced people from other parts of Iraq. Now, that guy, of course, or the governorate of Duhok is struggling not to get more tents, but they need housing, construction. They have a problem with waste management. They have a problem with sewage, with water, with energy. There are energy cuts because they've doubled their population. It's not because they have a label as refugees or displaced people, they're this, they're that minorities. It's simply more people. So don't tell me there's no know-how, no resources to deal with that building up of capacities. We have done it. We're in the middle of Europe here. Europe has reconstructed after the Second World War with lots of techniques, if you want, when it comes to all of that, how to finance and refinance housing, how to finance and refinance infrastructure. We have all the tricks of the trade. But they don't have social housing approaches. They don't have housing associations or cooperatives or something. So it's a question of transfer of what has worked somewhere, adjusting it, adapting it, partnerships. Know-how transfer is the future. Networking of the resources, moving the resources from A to B is the future of, in fact, aid, if you want. Dealing with the challenges of the world, of the Sustainable Development Goals. In 15 years, we have said we don't want to see poor people anymore. That's the contract we signed as international community, whatever is community in here. But anyway, we have said in 15 years, no poor people anymore. Everybody has access to health, water, energy, and so on and so forth. How? And I think you are the generation who makes that how happening. But don't do it with that truck driving to Greece. Make sure that Greek economy is coming up again, that people in Greece can live, that people in Iraq can live, that they can access what we have as collective capital in the world. For me, it's collective capital. It's all built up on what the world has as resources. So that's what I'm trying to get you to understand it's more than just giving the €5 into a box, or to go on a volunteering trip to a camp and actually say, oh, no, I've done something good. It's almost as bad, to be provocative, as having that selfie with an African baby and saying, "Oh, I've done something good." That's not about this. It's about making accessible what you have learned, what is in your brains, what is in your capacities and your networks, that strength, to transfer that strength. To change the narrative, getting away from your arrogance, my arrogance, standing up there and saying, "I know what you need." It's working in a collaborative way. But get away from neo-colonial behavior and thinking of deciding what we bring to the poor Africans. Get away from that, please. There's a lot of capacity, there's a lot of knowledge, but there's very little access. And that's what I'm asking you to do. But in the same time, to remain constantly open, not again go into a pre-prescribed track of what somebody has helped you. Challenge it, challenge the narrative. So before we go into a discussion, I would like to show you a little video to liven up to a little bit the discussion. It's actually part of the way of how I dealt with the refugee camp in Jordan, Al-Zatari, which I was managing in 2013 and 14. Just a little bit, stand by. I was managing in 2013 and 14, and I came there, again, prescribed what you had to do. The standard book of that's how you run a refugee camp. That's how you do that. And rows and this and that and so many liters of water and so on and so forth. And there was a constant rebellion by the people because we were not treating them as human beings, we were treating them as commodities. We had not understood that if you live, yes, if you survive, then you need first of all, if you want to survive, you need first of all aid to survive. But then you want to live. And then we have to accept that such a place, which has been built as a camp, is actually becoming a living space. It's becoming a city. So I was challenging the narrative of the victims. There were good and bad people living in that camp. 100,000 refugees from Syria. Good and bad people. There were lots of bad people. Assholes. People who were exploiting the others. And to dare to say that as an aid worker, there are assholes living here who are exploiting other people. They're criminals, there's mafia, there's whatever. That was the number one. Changing the narrative, daring to change the narrative. Daring to challenge the government of Jordan, which got very angry with me every time I was saying this is a city. We have to manage it as a city. Every city in the world has started as a camp. Most of them as a Roman camp, by the way, with tents and rows. I live in Vienna. It was a Roman camp once. So how to accompany transformation is one of the things. And just to give you a sort of a visual of the narrative, we're showing you now part of a series, A Day in the Life, which actually UNHCR accepted to change the narrative.
Wir bauen eine Wüstenstadt, während sie sich mit Menschen füllt. Woanders dauert es 20 Jahre, eine Gesellschaft zu entwickeln. Wir haben es in Monaten geschafft. Es passiert jetzt und hier.
When you talk about 500,000, most of them have relatives.
Yeah.
Or
And-
neighbors or whatever.
And are her relatives in Zalatari, or are they in Urban, or where? What made you come across?
ليش جيتي ست هالأيام؟ ليش ما جيتي قبل؟ شو اللي خلاك تجي الوقت هالأيام هاي؟
صاروا يضربوا علينا على المدينة.
يضربوا.
Okay. And you know you may be going to Zalatari camp?
تعرف إنك راح تروح على الزعتري على المخيم؟ Yes, I know.
And that's okay? Who would travel for up to 2 weeks through the desert with their kids to live in a refugee camp if there was any other choice? Zatri's got 120,000 people in it. It's now the world's second largest refugee camp. It's a city. And these people will make the city even bigger tonight. My name's Andrew Harper. I'm head of UNHCR's refugee response in Jordan. And they have to walk across the desert, and sometimes they get lost. So they spend the first night here, second night here, come down here, third night here, then they go to Zalatari, which is here.
No, it's okay. It's okay. No, tell me. We have the operations room going as soon as possible. My name is Killian Kleinschmidt. I'm the manager of Zalatari camp. They call me the mayor of Zalatari, but I'm also simply the boss.
So I welcome you to Zalatari town. 120,000 people in 530 hectares. They came in last year, July 29th, 2012, settling down here in what has become today the old town in the west part, the downtown, the slum. This is where everything is happening. It's about 8.3 kilometers all around, and we have a ring road. We have other asphalted road in the middle. 3.5 kilometers from west to east. It's a big place. It's not anymore a little refugee camp in the middle of the desert. It has become a city. Like everywhere in the world, these refugees were very angry people because they lost their homes, they lost family members, there's a lot of suffering in the conflict in Syria. But also there are people with an incredible initiative, with an incredible capacity to change the environment.
They don't like the way of how we put them down. They don't like the way of how we put them in rows, so they put them in little compounds.
The traders, they are people who have all their lives in their history have been doing trading. So it's very natural that they set up shops. It's very, very logical for them that anything they touch, they transform into business.
So how much does it cost?
قديش what?
A cup.
قديش بتبيع
Cup.
العصير؟
Yeah.
25 cents.
Okay. When we come back, I'll grab one.
نرجع نعمل.
Welcome everybody.
One dinner and how much? Like this? Like this? That's all? That's just cheaper than in Amman. Here we see a water tank, being a private water tank. 8% of the camp inhabitants have a private water tank. Either they bought it or they stole it actually from communal facilities.
They have destroyed a lot. They have stolen a lot. Now, have they stolen it or have they privatized it? I think they've privatized it.
Wow. Okay, Kuwaiti, Oman. A real bathroom. What is that? Wow. It's the shower.
So they're saying, well, I don't want your communal toilet. I want my private one. So I'm taking the materials from your communal toilet and just moving it a few meters and I make it to a private toilet. So you will find everywhere the bits and pieces of the public toilets transformed into private bathrooms. And that's where we started building up the vision that there we're building a city. We said, well, we also go build a city. So we were trying to bring together our vision, their vision and our vision. So we're now converging it, we're bringing it to one. It becomes complicated.
I did not meet you yet. This is a beautiful example of how it should not be.
If we don't work together, who is going to do this?
a few visuals about how to tell a story of a refugee camp, in this case, differently. I mean, again, remember the world doesn't consist of refugee camps. It consists of cities which used to be refugee camps. In fact, I think all the cities are refugee camps in a way, even Berlin. But what I'm trying to show is how important it is, again, to be open to change the story, the storytelling, the narrative. Don't take that as a given that because somebody is a refugee, he is a poor little chihuahua or something. I mean, it's a human being with the positives, the negatives, with everything. Anyway, on that, I think I will stop here, and I would like to have a discussion, ready for questions. Be open and feel free.